So now that I'm caught up in chat, we're back from break. I have a nice large beverage. We're going to be rejoined by our guest DM, Technatron. Pardon me, my voice cracked a little bit there. Guess the lemon in the tea is working. And we're going to continue going over motivation and confidence building and inspiration for old and new dungeon masters alike. Technatron, are you there?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a self-help. Well, I guess it's not a book, but stream. A VOD.
Well, hey, you know what? They're called experience points for a reason, and that's because we're sharing our experiences in life with others. And a part of that could be very cathartic. It could help us process things. Role-playing is very good for that. If there's an issue that you have a question about, or, that even if it's something that scares you or makes you uncomfortable, oftentimes by removing it from ourselves and placing it almost literally on the table, we can pick it up, examine it, and understand it better. And where we find information, oftentimes that banishes fear, because fear is often born out of a lack of information or misinformation. And so role-playing for many could be very therapeutic. It could be very stress relieving.
Yeah, that kind of ties into some really great stories that I know of. Probably the most interesting beginning plots of any TV show that I've ever seen preys on that very example, the unknown and the fear of something, and that was Lost.
Ah, yes.
And that one, if you can apply things like that, and actually, wow, you just made me think of something that's really, really good throughout history. But if you look at gods, classic monsters like your Draculas, your Frankensteins, Wolfmen, and everything like that, what makes them so iconic is that they have an element of the human condition to the extreme. So, for instance, like Dracula, like, what if cannibalism was an addiction? And like, I've heard people say, like, the question, like, what would it be like if you like were part of like a society of cannibals? It's so taboo and everything like that, but it's a curiosity. And the fact that that's instilled in a monster and then essentially becomes a bit of drama, that really rings home monsters and the impact that it has on us. Kind of what we were saying before, how important it is to take a character's page and bring it into your story. I would say the same thing is true for monsters, giving them that human element. And I would dare say, kind of what you were saying, you don't use a lot of dragons and stuff, and maybe that could be something that it's tied to, because it's so alien to you that you don't feel that it's close, and it doesn't really have that human element. But I would dare say, when you start treating dragons like these very aggressive personalities and big shock collars in society and stuff like that, actual intelligent being, they start having gravitas, if you will.
Good word. Good word. And you know what? I think to an extent you're correct, Technatron. I have personally treated dragons as something that is, they're very foreign. They are intelligent beings, but they're not humans. They don't operate as humans. They don't live as humans. And I'll tell you to a similar, but I guess in grandeur, a lesser extent. If you take a look at Volo's Guide to Monsters, they go into the psychology of the lizard folk. And that is an amazing primer to get you thinking about how different sentient races, or even, non-sentient, the instincts or behaviors of animals can work. Playing a lizard folk doesn't just mean you're a human with frills and green scales. You know, your physiology is different, your psychology, your society. Now, of course, I mean, it's all suggestions. You know, they're saying, you know, this is how our concept of the lizard folk live. But it's excellent to stop and to consider how vastly different it can be. Or, you know, just if we change one thing about ourselves, such as look at humans and elves. Pretty much we're the same being. We come back to pointy ears and round ears. But what changes about you if suddenly you live naturally for 1,000 years? What does that do about your attitude? And of course, you know, people ask, well, why do elves always come across as so aloof or so haughty or so different? And you look at them, they have 2 eyes and, you know, 2 ears, a nose and a mouth, and, you know, they're humanoid. And that one difference of their longevity very much can change your entire attitude. And if your attitude's changed, so does your culture, your technology, your magic, your lifestyle. I mean, it's like, I mean, elves would look at humans like pets. You know, it's not that they can't love. I love my cats. And it breaks my heart, but I know I'm going to outlive I hope I'm going to outlive my cats. That's because the cats just don't live as long. You know, that's how they're made. And I'm made the way that I am. And so I think differently than they do. And so it's very... Technatron, this is a rabbit hole we could just explore for an entire segment itself. Getting into psychology, the psychology of a creature, getting into, you know, forming a society, forming a different mentality, even amongst humanoids, just how differently they can live and still function and get along or even war with each other. But so I'm sorry, I stole the spotlight. And I'm supposed to be writing shotgun.
No, it's fine. You're bringing up points on why probably one of the more iconic characters of D&D is probably Drist. And the thing is it's the fact that they are so alien, but yet they've switched over and they have that identity of a adventurer on our side. But they, of course, there's the allure of Loth and things like that. So a bit of mystery to that character.
Taboo, even. That the feelings of rebelliousness that we might all have against, you know, the man, the system, the whatever.
Yeah, I think things like that are just very strong reasons why, like, the 3 whys are so important, because it isn't wrong that you have not in this edition, but you would have like players that would want to have a Lithid or a Mind Flayer for their playable race. It's not bad that you want to have a Brain Sucker as a character, but tell me why they're part of this group and how they work in this world. It flushes things out a lot. And it makes people feel a little bit more personal and deeper into their character. But that goes into one of not a small gripe, but one of the things that I think in 5e I would like to see changed is I think ability scores should just be +2 and then +1, and you get to choose where they are, and then no race necessarily has it, because I think it would be interesting to see a really strong gnome with a good constitution. We can make a reason for it, and it kind of builds that story element, and it lets you be a little bit more creative with it. And also, the mid-max player could appreciate, I can put this wherever I want.
That's a cool idea. I had not thought of that before. Because you do find that pattern amongst most races. You know, why couldn't you have an especially learned Dragonborn who might be more reclusive, and so why would they get the inherent or the intrinsic charisma, and instead want to take intelligence?
Exactly. Like, so with it still following like racial traits and stuff, like, oh, they can see well in the dark or something like that. It just seems interesting that, yeah, why isn't there a bodybuilding dwarf? Like, that just makes it pretty interesting. Or someone that is really pursuing the, like, if you were born with magic and it just like was going through you, it would make sense that you would probably want to understand it. So it would make sense for a sorcerer to go with like charisma, in this case in 5e, no matter who they were.
Mm-hmm. And you're giving permission for new DMs to add a custom rule perhaps to their own game, such as if everyone at the table says, yeah, let's just sit down and do that, and instead of the ability scores intrinsic to the race, everyone just gets a +2 to something and a +1 to something else. And I mean, hey, it's our story, right?
Oh yeah, I would make sure you run it by your players, because they're D&D players. I've seen interesting things happen over the years. So make sure you settle it with them beforehand.
Do you have a quick story to share so that we can learn from your experience and hopefully not have to experience something ourselves?
Yeah, if you guys want to know my background, I guess I should have done this to begin with. I've been a DM for about 19 years. And I played off and on. Obviously, there was gaps, but I've been pretty regular with it. And then I have a really cool server where I have upwards of like 20 to 30 constant players, but we're getting up to 300 people joining.
Ooh, wow.
And it's a 24/7 game of D&D, so I've ran into a lot of DMs, a lot of players, and I've experienced a lot of what's going on there. And yeah,
can you drop a link to that real quick in chat?
Sure. Can throw that up. Let me get that real fast. But what I'm saying is, like, I've seen quite a bit of stuff. And here's the link. And one of the things that can happen is one player will be very adamant about getting something for a stat, or a word or a phrase benefits a player. They're always going to be more apt to go with that. A perfect example is flanking. Flanking is a variant role.
That's true. This edition it is.
They actually changed, well, it isn't they changed the name, but they added on to an ability that is essentially flanking that works better in the system, and that is the help action. And the thing is no one really does the help action as much because it's new and unfamiliar, but since flanking came from other editions and they know that it's a benefit, they're always going to be more pro that, but it's not exactly the most balanced thing for the game, where the help action was supposed to, well, I wouldn't say I know for a fact it was supposed to replace it, but in its design it looks like it's a much more balanced version of it. But weird things like that. But we're getting into design elements. But that goes into the rehash, remake, reuse. As long as you're taking from things that already exist in the game, and you don't do anything that goes over the top or essentially goes way out of the way, you can do pretty much anything with some flavor that you would ever want to do. It's not hard to turn 5e rules into like sci-fi or stuff like that. It's not hard to turn a longsword into a katana.
Exactly. The Dungeon Master's Guide actually encourages that. They give you a whole list of weapons that you could reflavor. you know, the mechanics are the mechanics, but you could call it a katana. You can call it, you know, something else.
Exactly. And yeah, the same thing is true with like the monsters and designing a one shot. It's not that the bones of the one shot are wrong, but for your campaign, maybe you want it in winter, or you want to put in another element. Like you're done with goblins, you've done goblins a million times, but you want to do like Xfart or some grung. Um, there's so many interchangeable things. Also, I would say, don't be afraid of like really looking how expansive things get. It is a very, very deep world, at least in Forgotten Realms. And
Plenty
so
of
just doing
content there.
a little bit of research can go a very long way.
In another Discord server I'm in, someone posted a picture of Ed Greenwood's library, like his personal library, and it is what you would expect from someone who's created the Forgotten Realms. That man has so many references and history books and art and all this other stuff. And even for him, you know, he's established, published, and, you know, a notable figure in the role-playing community. Even for him, it's continual, ongoing research and discovery and tweaking and just all kinds of things.
Yeah, I love knickknacks and getting out of the box, anything for inspiration. I mean, I've done things similar to building a one-shot where there were spherical chrome golems that were essentially in this very like Underdark society with illuminating mushrooms and stuff like that. But the incline was pretty steep, and they were in kind of a slick area due to the coat and stuff. And so the chrome golems, that was their primary thing, to turn into balls and like essentially move everywhere really quickly. So they were like these speedy golems. Well, at the end, it went completely haywire, and like all these golems were going all over, and like the players were trying to control them in certain zones and stuff like that. Well, what I just described to you in one of my one-shots is a game of pinball.
I love it. Oh my gosh. And yeah, as you're describing it, you know, I have this fantastic imagery, right? I'm thinking of the caves and the illuminated fungus.
Yeah.
And you gave a reason for everything to exist as it does. And when you step back and say this is a game of pinball, that's amazing. I love it, and I super appreciate it too.
Yeah. Whatever, like anything can turn into a game. You just have to give, once again, the reason why it is what it is. And as soon as you warm it up, and I'll even say this can be a trap that DMs run into, but they like railroading. You'll hear railroading over and over again. But actually, the line between railroading and a good GM, or DM in this matter, is actually very close. And the big reason, like, one is bad and one is good, is explanation and the reason for it. So it's not wrong that your players wake up in a random place with their armor taken away and stuff like that. If you tell them you have strange markings on your arms, you notice that you're now in essentially a cell system where these drow are walking around, and you notice that you have been poisoned of some sort, so you can do a medicine check, and you start building the world upon it. Players are actually for that story generally. Like, you don't just completely uproot them, but I'm saying if you're building a narrative towards
Yeah.
it, they're going to like that much more than, okay, guys, we're starting off in the cells. You have no weapons? Go. Like,
Yeah.
what happened to all our gear?
Well, you know, because when we sit down and play, it's that feeling of I want to feel empowered. I want to be the big damn hero. I want to solve mysteries. I want to I want to do all this. And then if a dungeon master strips that from you, especially without indicating through opportunity to explore or just telling you beforehand, that can create a negative play experience. And in fact, you might have read about it, Technatron, or heard about it. There was that role-playing convention in England a couple weeks ago where there was a GM that was running a game and took these players, some of them new to role-playing, and ran a very intense sexual encounter with their characters when that wasn't the context of the game or the reason why that they were there.
Mm-hmm.
And when questioned about it, the GM said that he did it for the shock value. Now, of course, I mean, there were repercussions about that, because he's promptly disinvited, because that's just, that's not good form. But we don't have to go to, the extreme of a DM, forcing sexualized or some other content onto players to have them feel upset or angered or helpless in some way. But if you do provide context, and I love to reinforce context matters, and to make context that's explaining the scene. That's doing things like the marks on the arms, or you notice, for a character, play to their strengths. They may be helpless because they don't have a sword, but they have their medical knowledge. So play to that strength.
Exactly.
Describe that the dwarven character seems fine, but everyone else feels kind of sick. Well, we know that dwarves are a very hardy folk and are resistant to poison. And this could indicate so that's the first clue. Now you've re-empowered them despite giving them no equipment or, anything beyond what they can salvage from the cell. And the mystery begins anew. The escape plan begins anew. And it sparks imagination instead of suppressing motivation and thought. And so that's a very good explanation of the fine line of railroading or offering story content.
Exactly. Or as long as you have a reason why, just like, it's magic, giving the explanation, it now takes you from, like I just got shut down, to, that really makes sense in the world, and it really sparks the interaction. But I do want to touch on what you were talking about with that one DM. So there is a time and a place for everything, but I find a lot of DMs that are trying to go for that really shock value thing or whatever it is, which you can do with the right group, but having more restraints put on you actually, and working with the tools that you have, creates more creativity. So, for instance, if you only have a blank piece of paper and a pencil, well, we already know where we're going to go if we have to draw a picture. So it's not that it's a bad medium or anything like that. It's just you have these tools to work with, so you have to express it in this way. It's not that you're not going to create art. It's just that you're going to be more in this specific realm. Some of the best, I forget who the DM was, but probably gave me. They do DMing for children and stuff, and she does like learning disabled classes and stuff.
Oh, okay.
She gave one of the best beginning entrances to a story with a origami crane, and it just completely captivated like the world, the setting, and the mysticism of just a paper crane. And you're just like, that was one of the best, like, oh, it completely dropped me into the world. It was on GM Tips with Satine Phoenix. I believe her name was like DJ or something like that, but she was a blonde lady. But she gives like a really good introduction, and now it's just like, that seems so simple, but it was so impactful with just description.
I agree. And I do want to back up the point you made too, that there is, there's a time and a place in a group for all content. If everyone at your table is fine with kind of being dropped into a Survivor, you start out and everyone is it's like Age of Conan. You start out and you're naked and you have nothing. And if everyone's fine with that, I mean, more in a private game probably than a public one, but but we're getting into context, and you're still explaining, but everyone is open to more this content that might be more difficult mechanically or more adult conceptually. And I just don't mean like nudity or sex or anything, or if we talk about any of the big three taboo topics of religion, sex, or politics. Adult content could very well just be more deep or thoughtful content. More than just kind of a Saturday morning, like get the villain, and our episode is up. But, getting into, development or getting into exploring our weaknesses. The things that make us flawed as people. To challenge ourselves there.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that's really what it is. It's the pursuit of creating a story with the limits, or essentially the setting that will create something new. You could have forms of like just very taboo things, like we were talking about with the cannibal situation. You could really go horror story with it, but in actuality, you can build a very interesting story about cannibalistic goblins, and this is what their society is. And you could have like crusading clerics that are trying to put a stop to it, because even though Chult is wild, it still needs order. And that right there, you can touch on the subject, and it expands upon it pretty well.
Now, I do see we've been talking a lot about inspiration and sharing stories, and of course,
Yes.
I actually hit the bottom of your Pinterest, Technatron.
Okay.
I did it. We got through it. And I hope as we're having a conversation, because it wasn't meant to distract. I wanted to do this to inspire people, especially as we're talking about so many different things to just latch onto and catch. You have a very cool, Pinterest page with a lot of motivation and inspiration to it. But I there's a couple other tools that I think that you have here. If there's anything else you want to talk about before then go ahead. But as we've bottomed, we've hit the bottom of your Pinterest. Is there some other things, right? Because I did indicate that there's some DM tools and some other sources of inspiration we could go into.
Well, what I would say is, now that we've gone over essentially the whys, like finding the key, the MacGuffin, expressing like why certain things work with it, giving a little bit more explanation, I would say, well, what do we need now to make a more cohesive one-shot, or essentially session? I would say the best thing you can do if you really want your players to engage, and what we were talking about before with that one paper crane story I was giving, having a very impactful start is one of the best things that you can do, because that's what's going to trigger your players from going, "Hi everyone, like, did you bring the Doritos?" Like this and that, to like they're instantly in the game. If you start out really heavy and have something really impactful at the start, that will set the tone for the rest of the session.
And that doesn't have to just be something like in media res, which is, you know, the kind of a Tarantino, like, explosions. All right, now story. It doesn't always have to be that, correct?
No, it doesn't. It can be very descriptive, but if you are like lacking in one, there is nothing wrong with starting combat. Like, you walking somewhere, you're instantly in a fight. That instantly engages players, but if you do that too much, it can be very repetitive.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with doing something impactful. But yes, an explosion, coming across something, but giving an event or a reason why. Having someone run in like a halfling comes into the room, extremely like distraught, everything like that, and they're talking about the third phase of the fourth moon. What are you talking about? You notice that their pupils are dilated, this and that, and like they're completely mantic about what's going on. That already, you're giving like a reason why they're there. It's drawing interest. You can have them start convulsing, but giving an event and a reason for them to be there is the impact that you're looking for. Because the thing is what's going to separate the everyday today. And an event, a holiday, a fight, or anything will give more zest, if you will. And then also, I would say more so with the beginning, the end of it, you always want someone just really hanging on. We're always looking for the good cliffhanger, the reason for the players to come back. So the middle, and actually thinking of it like a movie, is not almost like, I would almost say it's a good formula, but not the best formula for a one shot. The best one is hit them hard in the beginning and then twist it at the end, where they're like, what is happening? A very great one was Chris Perkins did one in an episode where everything was going on and they were fighting hags. They had killed the hags. One kind of got away, but at the end, something you can hear walks out in front of them, but it's raining, and the rain droplets start taking a form and start cascading off of a figure.
Oh.
Right there, you're like, what is it? And then you're just like, well, next session we'll get into that. You're going to have your players like chomping at the bit.
Yeah, the episodic cliffhanger. And even on a one-shot, if everyone knows it's a one-shot, I think that's a fun way to end it.
Exactly. The thing is if you'll notice, players will really tank out once they get the loot. they'll go get the loot and they'll be like, okay, I've accomplished the task. Mm-hmm. I don't need to go talk to the NPC that set up the quest.
Yeah, just sort of zone out because we won and they have this happy haze.
Yeah. But leaving them more with suspension and something weird. We can take this same premise of like the halfling was convulsing. All of a sudden, they go back and everyone's convulsing in the town, and it seems like to be some sort of disease or thing like that. Like oh crap, do I have it? They're going to immediately do checks to see if they're poisoned. It, like, that right there is just going to make them have more of the drive towards it. And maybe that is the point that I'm trying to say, is it's not so much like movies, but it's more like TV shows. It's closer to Monster of the Week than it is to other things of that nature. One making a one shot.
Noted.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was typing there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We kind of went into the think tank a little bit there. But yeah, but with that, like, kind of going into the framework of hitting them hard in the beginning and twisting it at the end, I would say you are definitely getting players really involved. And what's funny is I've DM'd. I think the only thing that I haven't done is a huge mass game, like one of those where you go to GaryCon and there's like 300 people playing one game. Haven't done that, and I haven't played with a group of elderly people.
Oh, I haven't gotten to play with I haven't gotten to play with elder gamers either. I would love to do that sometime.
Yeah.
Just because the methodology, the thought processes could very well be different.
Oh yeah.
You know, not good, not bad necessarily. I mean, because that's kind of a prejudging comment or a thought process. But I agree. Now I can't say I've run a 300 person game, so I can't conceptualize that. But I do run a public game on Thursdays at my store, and there's times when we'll have about 16 people at the table, and you have to run the game differently, but you can still do it and have a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
But you have to be adaptable. You have to, be a little bit more improvisational, and you have to make some hard judgment calls. And for good or bad, you got to step up. You're the leader at the table, sort of by default. And there are times when you have to make a decision, even if it's a hard one.
Game Master Vault give a pretty good insight on it. But
I'm so close to an elderly GM walking around in my socks and sandals yelling, "You kids, get out of my dungeon!"
But the thing that I've noticed from playing games with like kind of that younger group, like 5 to 10-year-old age, and then like kind of the teenage and even like more like seasoned players, I find that the same rules still apply when it comes to the story creation. If it has the things that draw you in, or essentially the bones of a structure of a game, it doesn't matter if you're 5 or 50, you're still going to get drawn into that formula of how a story works.
Something that I say often on this channel, Technatron, is the ability to tell a story is our intrinsic, unique gift as a species on this planet. We can argue that it's our opposable thumbs, and those certainly can help. But we are the only known species on this planet that has the ability to tell a story. Fiction or nonfiction, and especially fiction. If you think about it, animals aren't necessarily capable of lying or of, creating fantastic scenarios. And this is our power. In a sense, it's a superpower because it holds sway over other people. It shapes the world in the images we conjure in our mind that don't physically exist. And so what you said is a very good example. You have a 5-year-old, you have a 50-year-old, you have a 60-year-old, 70, or however, old or young, in between, 13, 18, mid-30s. We're all still human beings who are programmed by our genetics.
Yeah.
To tell a story and to love a story and to want to be a part of a story. Oh, I'm sorry. Age of Tesla, you are correct. Also, we have round ears. You are 100% correct.
I was going to say, with kind of what you're getting on, I didn't know I was going to bring this up, but I actually have a philosophy that I came up with on what is art. There's a few trains of thought of what art is. So one is art can only be what art is, therefore it is art. And then there's the artist says that it's art, therefore it is, or the people decide that it's art, and they create the artist. What my personal take is it's kind of on the philosophy that you were talking about being creative storytellers. But if we look through history, we have conflict with deities or religions and stuff like that. But we always believe in science, and we're like, this is where the fact is, or this or that, and we find these arguing points. But I find that art is the only thing out of all of those, because what people will say, oh, that's not real, or this is factual, and we're looking for that tangible sense. You can touch it, you can smell it, you can see it. Art is the only thing that takes from falsehood and makes it reality. So
interesting perspective.
Yeah, my philosophy is just totally, it's the only medium that you can make a lie a fact. So
because you're producing a concrete manifestation of that idea. Is that correct?
Yeah. For instance, dragons. Well, dragons don't exist, but if you're playing with dragons and we're creating dragons, there's some truth to that. There is cartoon dragons. There is dragons in D&D. There is some truth to that, but it isn't like dragons actually exist. So us as creators, we're essentially giving truth to the fantastic or the unseen.
So we have an artistic license as a dungeon master to create worlds, to create fictions, and to make them solid and manifested for ourselves and for our players.
Oh, but people will argue anything, Princess.
Well, especially philosophers. That's their job. I can argue that philosophers not arguing amongst each other. And now we get back to the stack and how do we resolve that?
But anyways, going back to all the prep and getting the bones and telling the story and kind of what we've all worked on, there are tools. And yeah, you were going on that, and I gave you a tool that I use for essentially part of my framework if I'm coming up with essentially an item or getting ready for a session. I don't know if you guys have seen Roy's story cubes. They were pretty common a couple of years ago. I think they're still sold, but essentially all it is some D6 with images on them. And the game is you roll the dice and you put them in order and try to make a story. The thing that I gave you or linked you is essentially a very similar premise, but I'm setting it up to work with every die. um, and it's essentially like for weather, for fishing, for you're needing to create NPC. Just rolling things with random words will give you a framework to build something. Um, I would say the random D20s, it's just a bunch of words, um, like dog or pizza or whatever it means. And we were kind of talking about it before, but if you roll on something that's entirely random and you have 3 words and you have to build a one shot around it, and I was saying, oh, you have a blank piece of paper and you're only using a pencil. Well, if you only have 3 words and we have to use our pacing, we need to start with impact. We need to do all the steps for a one shot, but we have to do it under the umbrella of those 3 words. That will be a very strong way to build campaigns out of nothing or something very unique.
Age of Tesla asks a question real quick here. I do have your random tables open. Age of Tesla asks, what distinguishes a story from a signal? Do you?
Is that for me or?
Oh, I guess it could be to either of us. Do you have a response, or do you need a clarification?
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
To me, I mean, Tesla, if you wanna further refine that, to me, a signal is, maybe more of an ephemeral thing. A signal is something that happens, possibly in the grand scheme of things. A one shot could be a signal for something. Whether it's a point you want to make, or it could just be testing the waters for your players if you want to continue. A story has a more lingering, right? It's the difference between a signal flare fired from a boat or a nice warm cooking fire, in your hearth that is providing warmth and also food. Now, if that's my impression of what you're interpreting those terms as being, Tesla.
Yeah, I was way out of left field. I was thinking like, well, it's technically a sound wave, and our ears pick up the signal, so it's one and the same.
Hey, and this is another excellent example of how, given the same prompt, in this case, so Tesla took over as DM for a comment here, and the 2 players sitting at Tesla's table took the same exact sentence in 2 different directions, because of our own experiences and observations.
Oh yeah, you can have people read the same book, even the same paragraph, and everyone will take something different away from it.
Ergo, the smell of prey in an area could be a signal for predators. I don't know if that clears anything up. I think that's still...
In that sense, it's a story. That would be, I mean, just add a few more things on it. That would be the start of a story. And I think what the difference is a story can essentially be anything, but a signal is very specific. So you can have a story about a signal, but you cannot have a signal be a story.
Okay. Well, Tesla, did these two DMs answer your question adequately? And of course, anyone else out in chat who wants to answer that question from Age of Tesla is welcome to do so as well.
But yeah, the thing is that's a perfect example. Talking about just start nerding out on the most random thing. I have straight up seen people go to blows over who would win in a fight, pirates or ninjas.
It was, for a moment there, I thought you say it. I saw someone actually come to blows by arguing who would win in a fight. Period. In which case, it does seem natural. Yes, that's how we're going to resolve this.
Yeah, no, they got so steamed up.
Oh my gosh. Such passion.
Yep.
Can you take us through, since I have your sheet open here,
Yeah.
and we could relate back to the Dragon Head, or this could be about something different, to start over with a random prompt. Can you take us through, what's some inspiration, or how can we tie this back in to what you're discussing, with either ending with a twist or starting with something impactful, planning for a one-shot? Also, Jayhawk, apparently I'm here because Captain did raid us, and so welcome, Jayhawk. It's good to see you here, because I think I remember seeing you over in Cap's channel, and we raided him. But, hey, you're welcome to sit back and relax as we're talking storytelling, role-playing D&D stuff. We're not getting too heavy into it. You don't need to have your books busted out. This is all stuff that is intrinsic to us as human beings. Zuler Pie says, my 2 cents, the smell of prey is a signal, but to be a story, wouldn't it have to have some significance? What did the smell mean to some player or players? Touche, Tesla. Zuler Pie is poking back at you. Technatron, then, if you can take us through your chart and a couple exercises here, then.
Yeah, so this would be what I use for essentially framework to build a quick session. It's all about finding what you need, or essentially what you lack in, to create a session, or essentially a one-shot in this case. What this does is the D12 will give me a race, a profession, where they live, their class, are they a villain, what place do they live in, that's what the scapes are. I can just go through that way. If I need to roll to decide what time of day it is, what the weather is like, it's just essentially anything that I could think of that would be a good descriptor that I could just roll out, because it's far easier for me to roll a bunch of things and get the pieces on the table for me to put them together than it is for me to sit down and think, well, today I want my players to do this, this, and this. You end up not getting much variety. So if I know if I want weather, I want a new NPC, I want random events happening, that's what this is. And I just apply anything that I can essentially think of. If some of the descriptors are pretty loose, and I'm sure some of the spelling's bad, but
it happens to all of us who generate documents.
Yeah, but essentially this is one of the tools that I use. How can I speed up my process to create a story, or to create the bone structure of what a game is? Another thing that you can use, there's multiple things that you can use. We were looking at Pinterest pictures.
Yes.
But taking all these things that I find that inspire me will make me make a much more congealed or better story to work with. Kind of like your miniatures. Speaking of that, something as simple as getting a blister of miniatures and saying you need to create a story with it, that gives you the framework to expand upon it. If you did get, let's say, a dragon, a goblin, and what's something weird? A spider and an X-Bart. Something weird. I used that earlier. Or how about this? A Myconid. You have to make a one-shot with every one of those things, and you need to make it for CR1 players. how are you going to adjust it? How are you going to make it make sense? That right there, you have a lot of framework to build everything off of. And so I use tools or things that will inspire me to build it, hence the 3 Ys. That's essentially brainstorming. I would roll on a table because that will take care of some of the randomization. Also, random NPC generators, dungeon generators, all things like that. As long as you're using those things to your benefit and you know how to essentially control the medium that you're using, or your canvas, if you will, you will have endless inspiration. And I would also say being in streams like this is really, really good, because I find if I'm ever in a place where people are doing something that is very similar to what I'm doing, planning out things, coming up with concepts, and they're brainstorming, it gets me in that thought process and what they're doing. And that will just make you super creative. We've seen it in the chat as well when we were just talking about the 3 Ys. Everyone came up with a different arc. Everyone had their brain essentially geared to tell a different story. So setting yourself up to ask more questions and get rid of the middle ground is what helps me the most with when it comes to one shots or coming up with a good session.
As someone who also uses random charts in his workshops and for inspiration and the challenge of putting pieces together, hey, you're preaching to the choir. But I like this because while we resonate, your approach is different in various ways. I mean, looking at your chart here, as I've been looking it over, this is it's fun and refreshing because I'm so used to my charts and the way that I organize my information. And so in effect, my charts are a map of my brain. Your charts are a map of your brain. And we have 2 different roads, but they're both leading to Rome, as the expression goes. And so it's really refreshing to me as another DM, as another creator, and especially someone who is not afraid to tap into the powers of randomness and to roll with it. Number one, that it's freeing. It's very freeing to do this. But I love seeing how other people think.
Well, that's actually very true. Each of us are going to have strengths. One of my greatest strengths is I'm very improv oriented. Like, I'll be creative with anything. You throw anything at me, I'm generally going to run with it. I have that in spades. But where I might necessarily not have the best understanding of something, I understand I need to kind of fill those gaps and work on those before the session, because I know I already have the improv figured out. I know if you give me 3 words, I have the bulk of the session done, but I have to put more work in essentially getting comfortable or hyped up to get in the session.
Well, do you mind if I use your chart real quick and I'll throw out 3 words to you and you can give us a pitch?
Sure.
All right, let me roll in chat here. All right, so the prompt from your own charts here: screen, dog, and man. Screen, dog, man.
Okay, so what I would say is I would take the screen, turn it into a veil. I would apply the man and the dog to be best friends of some sort. So I'm actually going to make that a dire wolf and some sort of beastmaster that are locked behind the veil. There's several veils that are like known or imprisonments, or essentially they could be locked in Feywild, or let's go with Shadowfell. And there's a bunch of things that you could do, and I'm using that as a screen. But I think what could be very interesting is you could have someone imprisoned in some sort of gem or item. And I would take that, and the story would be that there's a vase or something like that depicted of a great beastmaster on the side of the vase, and then they open it, and then Pandora's box comes out. And that's where I would go with it, because that's already, you have the MacGuffin, you have the story arc of like this dire wolf and man's best friend going together, and we can make him a villain, or we can make them an ally. We could even do something really interesting and turn them into, because of the screen, we could turn them into ghosts, and we can have them be essentially something they could call out, like a Pokemon or something. They have little idols in D&D where you have like an owlbear, a lion or something, and you throw it out and it becomes that creature. Well, you can do something very similar like with that, with the Phantasm or something like that. So everyone wants Unseen Servant to do a little bit more. Well, what if you had an Unseen Servant that had a dire wolf? I would say that would be a fantastic way to go as well.
Let's see. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna do it for myself real quick, and I'll see what a quick little story prompt I could have, and then we can move on too. I don't want to stagnate or anything.
Yeah.
All right. So it looks like my prompts are Rainbow Callor, Callor, Callor.
Oh, it might be color.
Oh, color. Okay. Rainbow, color, and happy face. It seems like I got a slow pitch to me here. I mean, this is a tale of wonderment. This is a tale of someone who could be following the legend of the leprechaun, right? The treasure at the end of the rainbow. You find it, and there is, the glowing pot of gold. Of course, you're gonna have to get it from the leprechaun first. But when you do, the smiling, happy face, and then as you paint the imagery of just this shining gold over people, amidst everything that's here. But then again, this could be a trick, and if you want to leave them on a twist, if we want to blend some supernatural elements, what if we have this rainbow indicating the location of this fey creature's treasure? Upon taking it, what if that ends up triggering some kind of a trap, or it turns the rainbow, now we turn in Norse mythology, into the Bifrost, and then the group that fought so hard for this treasure, their eyes were all aglow with the glittering gold coins, are now transported to a fantastic place. And of course, when they land, it's probably not as colorful. The rainbow's gone behind them, and their faces change. Now, they still have the treasure, and it could still be worth something. It could be a MacGuffin in itself. But that's my quick, here's 3 prompts, and this is immediately what came to mind.
Yeah, and see how that's like a really good exercise. You have a completely unique story that you would probably never come up with, but you're trying to give it reason, and you're trying to give it like purpose, and that's actually why it's so good of a tool, because if you're trying to not be a stale GM,
Mm.
rainbow leprechaun treasure that can turn into a mimic is definitely something
Oh,
out of
yeah.
left field.
So it's good. This is good practice. I mean, look, as an artist, as someone who enjoys music and other arts, you didn't get the talents you have without practice. As a GM, you know.
Yeah, and also the perspective you put on it. You could make those words be as centered towards the MacGuffin or to the overarching story. You can have it centralized of, okay, I just want one little piece of the story versus, okay, I want to tell a whole story today with just these 3 words. It gives you a lot to work with, and once you understand that you want to start with a bang and with a twist, and you want to essentially do the framework of the pacing, we apply that to a picture, let's say. So we have the dragon's head. Well, we were talking about there could be something that like is some sort of artifact or something in between the 2 territories. You could throw in a whole Feywild thing that's trying to take it over from another realm because they just now saw the opening. And that right there is coming out of left field.
It's amazing that all of this came out of a random prompt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot. We talked about terms like MacGuffin and such, and this is coming into another term that we often call fluff
Yes.
here in the RPG industry. However, as a DM, GM, ST, there's also the interaction that we must have with crunch as a way to add narrative elements. I mean, even rolling dice is arguably crunch because we're abiding by the set of rules that we are going to come up with a story based on the results of our dice. And personally, as much as I've played D&D and other RPGs, I always have to look up crunch. I have to reference rules, and sometimes I have to make a decision on the fly that is very vital to the story. Like everything hinges on this moment. I don't know the rules. You know, we're in a tense emotional moment, and do I stop the game and look it up? Do I make a call? Is it fair? Is it not? Do you have any advice now? I mean, not that we have to stop talking about fluff, but especially as I have a cat butt in my face now. So for any of you who have the cat butt emote, you're welcome to put it in chat. But what do you have for players, or really, I'm sorry, for DMs who are worried about the crunch? Because I think that's a big hang-up. People are like, oh, there's so many rules to D&D. How do you memorize all this stuff? I would feel nervous. I'd always have to look at stuff. Or I would always be questioning, am I doing the right thing?
Well, I would say there's just tools that you learn over time. If you're in like a straight up pickle, you need to make a call and you need to make it now, go with your gut instinct. But I would dare say, even when things are extremely tense, there's 2 things that are generally like really good to use as just techniques. Long-winded phrasing. People have no problem with pauses. So, for instance, you come across a corpse. Its body is laid out amongst the docks. You notice the tide is red, stained with the blood of a war that has been fought out in the seas. But you know no ships have gone out that day. Yet you know blood has been spilt. Is this of a kraken? Or some other type of beast? Like, you give yourself a lot of space and you tell a story. Actually, those spaces are giving me time to think, and I'm creating a story where I didn't even know I was going. That tool, like long-winded spaces in between it, actually bring in more suspense. But also another tool that I would use is there is no problem in calling for a 10 or 15-minute break, especially when you've been sitting down for a little bit and you're just in the middle of it. If it's still hot, it's better to call a break then, because people are going to be more engaged to get back into it when you get back to the table.
The cliffhanger.
Yeah. And so call for a small break. Give yourself that time to go think it through. Look up in the book what you need to look up to find the right call.
There is also, I see a resource you sent over was a DM screen also.
Yes. Having tools that are just for the game readily available is invaluable. Like, there's so much stuff. I like this DM screen. It has pretty much every condition, and it has variable rules like madness, anything that you need to come up with on a spot. But this instantly takes you, DM screens take you from a bumbling idiot to, okay, you got this stuff under wraps. This is DM screens or information that you bring to the table. Like, for instance, if you have beholders and you went ahead and had your book open up to beholders and someone asked something about their personality or something, you can instantly look up in the monster manual, oh, they live in this society. You can give a little bit more lore behind the monster. But if you never had that and you had to make it up on the spot, you would, I would say a lot of people would freeze in that situation.
Now, another question to ask, and this is all a case of personal preference that can vary table by table. Technatron, do you roll behind the screen or in front of the screen if a screen is present?
I roll primarily behind the screen unless it's a dramatic moment where they need factual representation. Like, so something big's gonna go down, someone's going to die, I'll roll. I roll primarily behind the screen because there's a few interactions in 5e where mechanically you're supposed to roll behind a screen.
Mm-hmm. Like what, stealth versus perception?
Stealth versus perception, or like shield effects. So the thing is a player shouldn't know what you roll for it because it's only a +5. So you could still theoretically beat shield. And if they know the number, they now get metagame information.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes from, oh, I'll use my spell slot to, oh, I won't use my spell slot. And it can have an effect. But also, there's another reason why I roll behind the screen. Nothing is more powerful than just rolling random dice randomly.
That is a hidden technique, everyone. If any of you have run a game of D&D and you haven't done that, give it a try sometime. Now, I would do it in an appropriate moment. You know, don't just do it to do it. But Technatron is absolutely correct in that sometimes just by being a DM, even on a virtual tabletop, there have been a couple times on Tuesday where I've rolled a D20 for, you know, reasons. You know, why did Maddie just roll that D20? Why did I? What's happening? Is it helping me decide something? Was it a poor little mistake that I accidentally keyed in the command to roll a D20 on a virtual tabletop? It definitely gets attention, and it can also, it is a meta tool to heighten suspense.
Oh yeah. definitely. Um, you made me think randomly of another tool that, since we're talking to uh, newer DMs or even experienced DMs learning a new system. Uh, I'm surprised I didn't think of this sooner, but one of the hands down best thing is to get a buddy or someone to bounce things off of when you're learning a new system or you're wanting to run a game. It doesn't matter if that person's in your session or whatever it is, but let's say you're really worried about running uh like a madness campaign and you don't know the madness stuff. Go make two characters, run them against each other for like an hour, and then go play out some other things. You'll find that you learn the mechanic a lot faster that way than just reading it, because you'll actually have that person that you're talking with and you can actually say,
Yep.
hey, hold on, let me read this. And you figure out and you go through pace by pace. Hands down the fastest way to learn a system. You can read a book cover to cover, but you're going to put on the glazed eyes halfway through the book, and start messing it up in one way or another. A perfect example, I was reading this 3.5 book about fiends and demons.
Okay.
And I don't know if I straight up came up with an awesome story or it was a story that was in the book, because I was zoned out like halfway through it. But essentially what it was is a cleric was doing essentially dissections of demons. And the thing is since they can't stay on the material world, because if they die, they go back to the abyss, he had to break his vow to dissect them while they were living.
Oh.
And so he's torturing these demons and going through it. And I'm like, that's such a cool concept. But I don't know if I was just looking at a picture of a dissected demon and came up with this whole concept of a cleric breaking his vow. And being torturous. But the thing is I'm like, yeah, things like that happen. So having a person that can always ground you, and that goes for if you're ever studying in school. That's why tutors are so important. And whenever you can get like a teacher for art or a trainer for getting a better physique, it's always better to have someone there than doing it yourself.
Yeah, well, learn by doing. There is a natural cap. I mean, actually, martial arts does a very good job of exemplifying this. There's only so much that you can learn by reading or having someone else tell you things. There's a certain point where you learn by teaching or you learn by doing. And so, you know, as in most martial arts, as far as I know, you can only get a normal black belt, you know, and we often hold black belts in high regard. And it's not that those people haven't worked hard. Of course they have. Black belt is simply when you get to change gears and you go from someone who learns by, you know, by showing up to the lessons and by performing the, you know, the exercises. The only way to advance past that point is to start teaching yourself. And so that's when you show up to the lessons, but you're also an instructor, so that you can learn more than just the forms. You learn the purpose. You practice even harder, because now you're presenting and it's not just you. And so to have a partner, to have this ability to practice what is happening, to test your ideas out or to get some input is very vital. And you know what? That is, I have a cat butt in my face. That's exactly why, Technatron, I wanted to have you on the channel, right? Because you're someone that thinks differently. You know, we're both passionate about role-playing and a lot of similar things. Your approach is different, and so by having you here, I get to learn from you. I get to be inspired, to be rejuvenated, rekindled. in something that maybe I just felt set in my ways for a while.
Oh, yeah.
And this is an excellent example of exactly what you just said. You're full of really good advice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And actually, to add on it, if you've ever taught anything or done anything, you find that you're the student more than you are the teacher. In a lot of the cases, like, you need to come up with something new. Like, for instance, I teach guitar and stuff like that. If I have a new student, and of course, like, I have to run through all the stuff I've already done 100 different times.
Yeah.
But it makes me go back and work on my fundamentals. So it keeps me more solid, and it makes me understand that, and it actually makes me a better guitarist for that reason. And so, yeah, there's sometimes the start and understanding how to go about it is the best. But yeah, getting a friend to start a new system or to bounce ideas off of always works really good. But make sure they're a good friend, because you run into a person that will just always be devil's advocate and never wants to take the pace forward.
Oh, well, and someone who'll be honest with you, even if it's criticism.
Oh, yes. And that's not bad. Criticism can be very good. But, yeah, it's all about how you go with it. And yeah, that kind of what I've been going over today is always stick with things like that you can apply to several different situations that round you out, to be more versatile and to be more impactful with 30 minutes of prep time versus 4 hours of prep time. Because by doing that, you actually be more effective in your practices of being a DM or creating a one-shot. So working on improv skills or working on your frailties will make you much more well-rounded.
And incorporating the things that you do and know in your life into a game too, to make it more real and passionate.
Oh, definitely. It was kind of like talking about the monsters for a little bit. As soon as they have that life effect, or that dragon is a little bit more relatable, it becomes a lot more impactful to your game. I mean, there's something to be said with an extremely violent dragon that is all about destruction and stuff like that. I mean, heck, that's why Hulk's so relatable. Is because if you did have that anger that was uncontrollable and you could rival the gods with it, I'm sure there's people that have been so frustrated in situation and punching pillows or whatever it may be that sympathize with that simple ideal.
As a fun exercise, my roleplay group, we all sat down one time and we're having table talk, because that's what you do. It's part of the custom. And we we made a list of who we would have to off first if any of us were to get superpowers, because we'd be too dangerous or too uncontrollable with them. So it was a fun little, like, we didn't do it as an exercise or a warm-up, but we're just sitting back thinking, oh, so if so-and-so got superpowers, we'd probably have to kill him, right? Oh, yeah, for sure, but not before this other person who got superpowers. We definitely would have to take this person out next. Technatron, are you all right if we get up and take another little break here to refresh and use restroom and such?
Yeah, I would say after this, like, let's go kind of work on that one shot and get it a little more well-rounded with kind of what we've been talking about.
All right. So everyone, I have 2:14. Let's get up and get a snack, a drink. Let's stretch, use the restroom, and when we come back, we'll tie this together, and we'll go until 3-ish. I mean, a little before, a little after, but we'll use 3 as our target. maybe practice what we've preached a little bit, and we'll see where Technatron leads us on this wild ride.
For sure.